Hey everybody, we ready to go? Great. Good morning. Good to see everybody. Thanks for joining us here at BC Liquor Store in Victoria, British Columbia. It was about a week ago we announced taking liquor products and other products made in Republican states off of the shelf here at the liquor store and at all of our public liquor stores across the province. Since then, we have seen a threat of additional tariffs on the dairy industry, an investigation into our lumber industry by the president with the aim of adding even more tariffs, and disturbing articles in the New York Times and other places about the president threatening to redraw our borders and pursue Canadian water. Now, the reaction of many British Columbians, myself included, is if the president's so interested in Canadian water, then we're going to help him out by letting him keep his watery beer. I'm here to announce today that we are removing the rest of the American liquor products from the shelves of the BC liquor stores. That's wine, distilled products, and beer. And we're doing this for a couple of reasons. One is to respond to the escalating threats that we're seeing from the United States. The other is to recognize the feeling that many British Columbians have now when we look at American products, we don't even want to see them on the shelf anymore. It's a matter of strategy to go after Republican products, to target Republicans, the ones who are doing this, to American families and Canadian families. But I have received many emails and letters and interactions with people who they don't even want to see American products right now in our government liquor stores. And so we're sending that strong message. We're responding to what British Columbians are asking for, and we are removing the remainder of the products. In addition, we'll be, in the coming days, introducing legislation to enable us to add tariffs to vehicles traveling from Washington State to Alaska. We'll be working with the federal government in supporting their continued tariff response against the Americans, as well as with premiers across the country, including to remove internal trade barriers to grow our economy. And we'll be accelerating projects here in BC to make sure we can stand on our own 2 feet and support families across the province whose jobs may be threatened by these actions of the American president. With that, look forward to taking your questions.
Thank you very much. To all reporters on the line, please press *1 to get into the queue. We'll go in person first. Rob Shaw.
Premier, why didn't you do this in the first place, considering all the other provinces just banned all American liquor rather than red states? And in retrospect, should that have been the original kind of move by the province?
Well, there's 2 reasons, Rob. The first is, it's challenging to have conversations down the west coast of the United States with leadership from Oregon, from Washington State, Congress people, governors, and hear how on side they are, the work that they're doing, the work that Democrats are doing to advocate for Canada, and then to turn around and threaten jobs in their states. By focusing on Republicans, the goal was to send a message to Republicans to pressure the Republican president. And it worked. We saw the head of Jack Daniels say that what we were doing was worse than a tariff. I guess that's what you call a proof point. But for British Columbians, and certainly for myself as well, to see the president explicitly threaten to redraw the border, to come after our water, to add even further punitive tariffs to our softwood lumber industry and dairy industries, and to see it accelerate, it's hard to see American products on the shelf in our government liquor stores. And so the BC Liquor Distribution Branch is stopping purchasing of American products. The products won't be here on the shelf of the government liquor stores. And we're going to respond to both the strategy of pressuring Americans as well as the gut feeling that we all have about American products right now. We just don't want to see them.
I'll pull a Zussman with a 2-parter for a follow-up here. But on the trucking tax that you're talking about, are you also considering Point Roberts, which is landlocked and requires trucks to come through Canada. Would that be taxed as well? And then separately, can you give us your thoughts on a new prime minister in a few days, the possibility of a federal election, how that impacts the Team Canada approach in responding to Trump?
Yeah, we've been pretty focused on Alaska, given that there's a Republican congresswoman that's deciding vote on issues and a Republican governor, it's an associate of the president's, to pressure them to pressure the president. But the legislation that we are putting in place enables us to deal with any commercial transportation between U.S. borders, and we understand that we're going to be able to do that in partnership with the CBSA. As far as the federal leadership race and the federal election, first of all, let me congratulate Mark Carney. I look forward to working with him as Prime Minister, and I'm watching for when the transition will take place from Prime Minister Trudeau. The uncertainty and the challenge that we've had at the federal level has required the provinces to step up. We're going to continue to step up to respond to this threat. And I certainly look forward to resolving that uncertainty as quickly as possible. So for the new Prime Minister to make a decision about calling an election, getting it done with, or providing some explanation to Canadians about what he's putting in place to ensure that we can see that stability throughout an election period and an interregnum period. It's crucially important that we have a strong federal government at this moment.
Next, we'll go to Rob Buffum, CTV.
Oh, hi, Premier. I'm hoping to wedge a couple in here. It's such a busy time, both on behalf of colleagues. One is China's announced tariffs coming on Canadian products, including agricultural things that could hurt our farmers and fisher folk. What's your reaction to that? What's the province going to do to help farmers? And a separate question, was it hard to make the decision to, apply tariffs to, say, California wine? We've had these great relationships with Washington State, Oregon, and California, and we're now going to be hurting them. They're going to be collateral damage. So those are two.
Yeah, I'll take the second one first. When we look at who's speaking out in favor of Canada, supporting Canada, and advocating in Congress and other places for a trade policy that understands how deeply intertwined the Canadian and American economies are, how we prosper together and how we fail together, that's a very clear formula that the American stock market is outlining for us this morning as well. It's a challenging thing, but for me and I think for many British Columbians, just seeing American products right now is and knowing that we're using space in government liquor stores to sell American products is a step too far. And so we are going to be removing these American products. We're going to be encouraging Republican and Democrat elected officials to be more aggressive in defending Canada's sovereignty, stepping up and speaking out against the president's ruinous economic policy that is not just threatening Canadian families, but is threatening in a very real way the stability of the American economy with the chaos and uncertainty that he has brought. And then we get back to a place of building up each other's prosperity. And in the meantime, Canada diversifying away. The escalation in tariffs with China is a big deal for British Columbia. The initial tariffs that were put on by Canada as an attempt to curry favor with the president, in my opinion, have not had the intended effect. The president has been completely indifferent to our policy towards China, and in fact, he doesn't seem to have any designs on treating Canada better than China. It's a very strange thing. We understood that he was concerned about security issues related to China, and yet he is coming after Canada far more aggressively than he is the government of China. I think it'll be necessary for the federal government to have a look at tariff policy with respect to trading partners around the world, understanding that we don't want to get crushed between the two biggest economies in the world, the American and the Chinese economies, and ensuring we're diversifying around the world. But obviously, it's a very challenging time right now. As for the impact on canola farmers and other farmers and the additional duty on Canadian seafood, it's fortunate for us that we do have access to global markets through our ports for our seafood products, and we're going to support that diversification going forward. We'll work with the Government of Canada to support individual businesses and farmers. They have committed to use their employment insurance program for workers. and we'll be looking at supports for business to support them to get to other markets other than China and the United States, given the tariff fight that's going on.
Thank you. By way of follow-up, I wanted to get your reaction. You've obviously been following the fireworks with the BC Conservatives, 3 MLAs no longer part of that caucus. It should be an interesting question period today. What's your reaction? What are your thoughts on this? We're going to see maybe an additional fourth party in the House. What are your thoughts generally on what unfolded in the last few days?
Yeah, I think, John Rustad did the right thing. It took him too long, but he did do the right thing. It's necessary to stand up for residential school survivors. It's necessary to stand up for our partnership with Indigenous people in this province. That's the way forward for this province to grow our economy and ensure everybody's boat rises. And so that's good. He has some more work to do around members of his caucus that are expressing openly anti-Canadian perspectives, pro-Trump perspectives. And I would encourage him to not stop here, to ensure that his members reflect the values that we all have as Canadians. And I'll just cite a couple of examples. The fact that members of his caucus that are still there couldn't bring themselves to vote to condemn tariffs, to target Republican states, to be part of Team Canada, that they voted against that motion is a very troubling sign. The fact that Brian Tepper stood up in the House and introduced as a patriot a YouTuber that literally apologized to the United States for Canada's retaliation, who called Doug Ford's electricity tariff a war crime. This was a man introduced in the legislature by a Conservative member as a patriot. So John's got some work to do if he wants to ensure that the extremist views in his party are addressed.
Next, we'll go to Richard Zussman, Global News.
You mentioned earlier you're going to be watching closely the policies that Mark Carney brings in when he's sworn in as Prime Minister later this week. One of the things he's promised to do is to get rid of the consumer-based carbon tax. So how quickly should British Columbians expect the consumer-based carbon tax to be removed here following a decision from Ottawa? And what are you going to do to replace the revenues that come in through that carbon tax?
Yeah, I think, first of all, if I can take a step back, I think it's unfortunate that a policy that existed between governments for a long time in British Columbia, a successful policy in driving down our carbon pollution that had support ultimately on both sides of the legislature, was politicized and accelerated in the face of a cost of living crisis in a way that that cost public support across the political spectrum for it. I think that's really unfortunate because it was an important tool here in British Columbia. With that said, we made an unambiguous commitment to British Columbians that we will get rid of that carbon tax. We will move as quickly as we can following the removal of the federal law that requires us to have it in place and ensure that we're able to move forward. We're going to continue to make sure that big polluters pay in the province. And for the people who are filling up their cars, who are heating their homes, for the residents of British Columbia, we're going to make sure that the carbon tax is not there for them.
Another energy-based question. We've seen what your colleague Doug Ford is doing in Ontario around moving towards cutting off electricity to the United States. Would any consideration be given here around our electricity mix and shutting things down for California and others along the coast who rely on it? And more holistically, how crucial is it for BC to gain electricity or power independence? We buy from them, we sell to them, it sort of depends on the cost, but do we need to stop relying on the United States for any of our energy mix?
Sure. Just first on your question, Richard, we could stand fully independently on our own electricity supply in British Columbia today. Our industrial customers, our residential customers would be served, but it would be more expensive. And significantly more expensive. We sell electricity to the United States and we get top dollar for it. And we buy when they produce too much electricity, particularly through wind and solar in California. They sell up to us at very low rates. And so in doing so, we provide cheaper electricity to all British Columbians. Our goal in targets to the Americans, when we're talking about retaliating against the actions that we're seeing, are to do a couple of things. One is to do things that send a strong message, which certainly Doug Ford has done, with that 25% additional charge. The other is to minimize harm to British Columbians. And so when we have businesses that are already facing tariffs, that are electricity dependent, as many of our businesses are, I've heard aluminum described as solid electricity. Increasing the cost of electricity for British Columbians at this time would be counterproductive. With that said, we are putting in place legislative tools. It is hard to predict where this thing is going. And we don't want to be caught without a tool to be able to cut off electricity or increase charges on electricity to the Americans, even if it means higher charges for British Columbians if it comes to it. But we're focused on things like the additional charges for trucks to Alaska for the express reason that they minimize harm to British Columbians while maximizing impacts on the Americans. And all premiers are currently looking for options that they have that are similar across the country right now.
Next, we'll go to Chad Pawson from CBC.
Yeah, thanks, Premier. Any discussions going on with the federal government about perhaps taxing U.S. thermal coal as it travels through BC to ports?
Yes, I've presented directly to the Prime Minister the proposal that the thermal coal that comes from U.S. states and transits through Delta to the Delta port could be tariffed and subject to additional charges from Canada or even restricted entirely. This is something the federal government has committed to do in any event by 2030. So it's something in line with the values of the outgoing Prime Minister and what his priorities were. I think it's a useful target because this is a product that Western U.S. states refuse to ship through their ports. And effectively, the only way to get that product out is through British Columbia. Because it's federal jurisdiction, we're very limited in the tools that we have around this coal flow. But the federal government does have the ability to tariff and add additional charges here. And we're encouraging them to have a good look at it because it seems like a helpful target.
Chad, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, sure. Can you maybe explain in your own personal life what the biggest change has been for you in seeking to buy Canadian within your own family?
Yeah, this is a bit, not the easiest conversation we had at home, I'll be honest. We've been working to get the kids down to Disneyland for a while. One of the realities of this job is dedicating that time and being able to get there is a challenge sometimes. You have a moving calendar and it's a moving target and one of the kids off school and so on. And so Kaylee purchased in advance, as well in advance of any of this, ride tickets, about $1,000 of ride tickets, day passes or whatever they are to Disneyland. And then all of this happened, and she watched at a press conference as I discouraged all British Columbians from traveling to the United States if they had a choice, recognizing the realities that many people have family members and friends down there. There are a lot of sacrifices that my family has to make because of the job that I do, and I'm very appreciative of it. It was not the easiest conversation. It led to a Google search for other Disneys around the world. But we're not going to an American theme park for the foreseeable future. And so we'll, like many British Columbians, be choosing to spend our vacations in some other way.
Next, we'll go to Les Lane from Times Columnist.
Well, thanks. So Mark Carney, as Prime Minister, will get rid of the carbon tax, and you've promised to follow suit. You promised in the throne speech also to look after people to the maximum extent possible through the tariff crisis. Would that promise lead to, essentially, why don't you get rid of the carbon tax as soon as the pain starts to hit from the tariffs? Might as well get it over with.
Well, we would get rid of the carbon tax immediately, but there is a federal backstop carbon price that exists in law that requires us to maintain the carbon tax for now. We think our system is better than the federal system that they would impose on us if we stopped ours. So when they remove that backstop through legislation, then we'll remove our carbon tax as well.
Last question, Les.
Just as an example on the retaliation and the bounce back, how it hurts everybody. If you did cancel or forbid, or you or the feds did block thermal coal shipments, there's Canadian jobs at those docks. Have you got a job impact loss in terms of doing that? How much do we hurt ourselves?
Yeah, there are significant impacts, and I've already heard from people in the trucking industry expressing concern about the toll on trucks going through from Washington State to Alaska. Their concerns are part of our considerations about the decision when and if to use the legislative tool that we're putting into place. I know that the Longshore Union is anxious about the discussion that's taken place around thermal coal, and understandably, they're members that are loading that coal. So we would certainly encourage the federal government to take that into account. When they're collecting tariffs on things, one of the commitments that they made that's a tax, so it's revenue flowing to the federal government, is that they use that revenue to offset what they're doing. There's lots of capacity improvements that could be brought to the ports to assist us in accessing other markets. They could keep longshore people working hard for us, and we would encourage them to do that.
Thank you. That concludes today's event.
Great. Thanks very much, everybody.